children's stories. Is that an easy option for a writer, writing children's stories? A simple option? Oh.
It's the hardest option of all. I can say that because I've done the other one as well, a lot. There's absolutely no question to me that writing, we're talking about fine children's books as opposed to fine novels, adults. The children's book is far, far harder. It's not any harder, it's more important. If you want to know, I'll tell you why I think that in a minute. But it's harder, and I think I can almost prove it, because there is no writer of consequence in the world, or who's ever lived, who hasn't had a go at a children's book. From Tolstoy to Graham Greene's done 4. He's our finest living novelist. He's done The Little Train, the little fire engine. Now you're smiling, you see. Well, okay, because they didn't succeed. Nabokov, Bella, anyone you want to mention has had a go at it.
How are we going to get our children to read books again? Because I have some difficulty with my children making them read. I love to read, and I read a great deal, but I'm of the radio generation. How are we going to persuade the television generation of children to go back? It is
very, very difficult indeed. When I was young, there was not even any radio. When I was 9, I had a crystal set, and you put the little thing on it with the earphones. No, there was no problem then. I agree with you, it is difficult. Very, very difficult.
So you don't draw from your own experience, but you've had a pretty colourful life apart from your books, haven't you? You were an RAF, in the RAF during the war. You crashed. And didn't I read that you were a spy?
No, that's an ugly word, spy. No, I did. I worked for British SIS, yes, the last half of the war when I was injured and couldn't fly. Sure I did. Yeah. I went to America and did it. I was very lucky because my first little book I wrote was called The Gremlins, which was bought by Walt Disney. And Eleanor Roosevelt read it to her grandchildren and loved this book. And so I got invited to the White House. And we got to know each other a bit, you know, and I would go for weekends. FDR had his country place was called Hyde Park, a fast place, and I used to go there. Got to know him. I was only a young chap of 26 in an RAF uniform, and had no business around there really. But I was able, because of meeting at Hyde Park and in the White House, there was half the cabinet all the time. There was the Secretary of Treasury, Henry Morgenthau, and people like that. They were all there. And my job was to try to help Winston Churchill to get on with FDR and tell Winston what was in the old boy's mind in America, you know. I was really not spying against the Americans. I was trying to create amity. This wasn't where your flair for fiction grew up, was it? No, I couldn't muck about with that sort of thing. But it was incredible for a young chap to know those sort of people, you know, in those days. He was a terrific jokester, FDR. Can you write children's stories and horror stories at the same time? Oh, no, I couldn't write two things together, ever. It's so much work trying to think of one, you know, plots. What we're talking about children's stories, the horror stories. What's the art about frightening the life out of people, is there? Oh, I don't try and frighten the life out of anybody. I don't write horror stories. I write funny stories. No, I really do. With strange, quirky twists at the end. Yeah, but they're funny. It's what I think they're funny anyway. I mean, there's such a narrow line between the macabre and the jokes, I mean, and laughter. It's a very I mean, for example, if a woman who's deeply in love with a man and finds he's been doing nasty things with some other woman, crowns him with a blunt instrument and kills him, that's tragedy, right? It's tragedy. If she happens to have a frozen leg of lamb in her hand and crowns him with that, then they begin to titter, you see. Well, they are, yes, they are. And then if she takes the frozen leg of lamb, puts it in the oven and cooks it and feeds it to the detectives who are looking for the murder weapon, that's comic. a very narrow line between the two.